Hello everyone, I'm the Atheistic Preacher, and today I'm going to try a different style of making videos today. So I had an interaction on TikTok where most of my interactions begin, and there are three people who are important to this story, okay? It is Dom, Wonder, and Dr. Joshua Bowen. Now, Dr. Joshua Bowen writes these books, the Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, as well as, I think, his most popular, Did the Old Testament Endorse Slavery? Slavery is a very highly debated and highly discussed topic right now when it comes to why would the Bible God, if he is a good and just being, allow such a barbaric system into his law. Some people say that it's not at all what we think what we think when we think slavery, and then some people are saying no, it is. But who are you to question God? Now, no matter where people end up on this spectrum, there's certainly a lot to discuss and go over. So, Dr. Joshua Bowen is a scholar, written books on the subject, and lots of people would like to know his opinion on certain things. Now, there is a video of, I believe it's Dom, who made a TikTok live. And if you don't know what that is, it's just basically, a live where you can jump in and talk to people and stuff. Anyway, Wonder was up there with him, and Dr. Bowen joined it. And so they had a conversation, and somebody clipped a small part of that and went ahead and posted that and was basically like, haha, you're wrong, to Wonder. Wonder then made a response comment saying that he was not wrong, that the clip was, clipped, and that he got Dr. Joshua Bowen to admit that it was not chattel slavery in the Bible. So, just for context sake, I'm going to quickly go through the messages for that real quick, just so we can see exactly what it is when we listen to this audio that Dom was so kind to send me so that we can get the full understanding of what was said in this conversation. And so we'll hear what Dr. Joshua Bowen says himself. We'll see if what was said in that moment was taken out of context. We'll see how it started, we'll see how it ended, and any other questions that were addressed in between, because at the end of the day, we're here for truth. And if we have a scholar saying that yes, the Bible did endorse slavery, and now is telling these Christians that atheists don't know what they're talking about, and it didn't endorse specifically chattel slavery, well, we need to understand who's saying what. We want to move forward with the truth of who said what, so then we can therefore look at the work of both this scholar and the past conversations of Wonder to see maybe who has the truth here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and show the messages for that now, and then we'll jump into the audio that was sent to me. So this is the comment interaction where I ended up asking for the audio. You'll see in the next slide the original comment Wonder posted, basically calling the poster a liar for being selective of what they put inside of the whole conversation. And so I said, and in this whole recording, are you able to show him, Dr. Bowen, that it's not the case and he gets it? Basically that chattel slavery is not in the Bible. Or is it still you twisting scripture to avoid it saying what it clearly does? Wonder responds with, LOL, he agreed to all my terms and agrees that atheists are twisting the scriptures, he even agreed to the 5 tenets of chattel slavery, and as usual, I'll just say B, didn't clip the whole convo and has now disappeared off the map after being caught in his lies. So I said, oh, you're saying you got Dr. Joshua Bowen to admit that atheists are twisting scripture and that chattel slavery is not in biblical texts. Wonder responds in all capitals and many exclamation points, yes. And you can see that original comment that started this whole thing up there where Wonder says you didn't pay attention about what he said. Again, you posted a clip and didn't post the whole thing. I got you now for lying. And so I said, great, post that please and thanks, or Dom, he has a recording since it was his live. Wonder said he is literally saying that everyone has to agree to terms, and in the convo be posted, he cut it off, LOL. And so I said you could be right. Let's see the full recording of the talk with Dr. Bowen. Please post it. Thank you. So Wonder said DM Dom, I can't post it. It's his, but he is working on it. So I added him, and I said, please post the full recording of this talk with Dr. Bowen so we can know who is not being truthful here. I care about truth, and I'd like to know if the OP is clipping things to show a biased conclusion or if Wonder is misunderstanding what happened. Thank you. And then Dom responded later and said, I'll clip it later. And I said, thank you. Just please be sure it has the full time Dr. Bowen is up there so there can be no further claim of it's just conveniently clipped. I appreciate it. And so Dom was kind enough to share the audio of his live with me, and so we are going to listen to it together, and we're going to, talk about it. Like as I said, it's going to be kind of a different style video. I have never done a reaction to something that I have not seen before or heard before, but yeah, I haven't listened to this before, and I'm looking forward to listening to it now. Hopefully the audio comes through well enough. So as of right now, I'm starting the live, and I'm skipping to where Dr. Bowen comes in around the 35-minute mark, and we'll hear their introductions probably here in a second. Alright, let's just jump into it.
It's alright, you know what? I'd rather happen to me now than deal with it later. Remember, take your beatings now than do it later.
All right, well, you have a good day, sir. I mean, there's nothing else we can present to you.
Hopefully that
Dom,
helps.
are you here? Dom? What's up, Dr. Bowen?
How you guys doing?
Hey, how are you? Dom? Hey, Ty, can you let Dom know Dr. Bowen's here for him? Dr. Bowen, the host wanted to talk to you for a minute, so as soon as he comes back, if you got a minute, he wants to talk.
Yeah.
Huh?
No, that's good. I just had to step outside.
Okay.
But I'm good. I got a few minutes.
Okay. As soon as he gets back, I'll let y'all two talk, and I'm gonna talk to Pork Chop,
Sounds
if you
good.
don't mind.
No, it's
All right,
great.
thank you. All right. Pork Chop, what's up?
Alright, so we're going to get a little bit of a different conversation for a bit, but it looks like Dom sent out the invitation to speak with Dr. Bowen, and Dr. Bowen accepted, went up on his live. So we'll wait a bit for that conversation. Hopefully it won't be too long, but yeah, let's see what happens.
Man, you had a contention with the prompt or anything? Pork Chop? Pork Chop, are you there? Pork Chop, are you there?
While he answers, do you mind if I ask something, just add something to the statement? Hello? Okay.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm trying to get in contact with the host. I'm listening to you.
I just feel like some atheists do understand, like they read it, but they just don't understand that laws are different. Back then, it was made for different people, and now that we're in the new world we use, our laws was made for us, you know?
Well, yes and no. There's a purpose for the Old Testament laws, and God tells us what the purpose was. And basically, the Old Testament laws is to lead us to Christ. It's to point out that we are sinners, and we needed to know. And through the laws, it leads to Christ. And that's Galatians chapter 3, verses 15 through 25, that actually shows that. So that is the purpose of the law. And also, when you get into Hebrews chapter 7, it literally says that if there is a change in the high priest, it must be a change in the law. Meaning, they were under the law or under the high priest Melchizedek. Now we're under the high priest Christ, and because Jesus is not of the Levitical priest and is of Judah, there is a change in the law, which now we're under grace, which means we have the greatest commandment is to love. and not all the we don't have to do all the 600 and plus laws.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm like talking about mainly when it comes to Dear Tom, and I don't know how to pronounce it, sorry. People like just always say that, oh, that seems like a horrible law, this and that, but things are different back then, for the ancient Israelis and Israelites and stuff, and people just always interpret that our God was bad, even though he was only making laws fit for different generations.
So here's the thing about that is that it's not lost on me. I can't speak for every atheist out there. I can only speak for me. But it's not lost on me that looking through the biblical text that this was a different time period. And I can understand the argument of like, oh, well, it was a different time period. They had different laws back then. Sure, I get that. That's just historically true across many cultures. The problem becomes when you want to throw in, as most Christians do, a tri-omni God that is setting up laws for his good and godly nation that are supposed to be set apart, that are supposed to be a light unto the rest of the world. The people that are supposed to do his will righteously. They're a kingdom of priests. But the problem goes is, well, did God give them bad laws? It seems according to the scripture, yes. Did God knowingly give them bad laws? Yes. And did he have to give them bad laws? I don't think he did. Now, when we see things like what we're probably going to talk about soon, like slavery, one of the common pushbacks is that, well, you have to understand that God was just giving them laws for what was appropriate for them at that time. If they just took away slavery, then that would be an economic failure, a crash. It would cause so many problems in the rest of their society. So God was just over time taking away slavery. I don't see any support of that at all in the scriptures, at least. But the problem with that is that God doesn't care if it's a part of your time or if it's a part of your culture or wherever you lived before. Things like idolatry, big deal, done all throughout the cultures around them. And God said, absolutely not. Worshiping other gods, huge thing among every single culture around them. God said absolutely not. There were so many things that they did even before when they lived in Egypt, or all the cultures did around them, that God said no, absolutely not. So God doesn't care about the time and place. All he cares about is, I gave you a rule, obey it. And when it comes to things like, oh, well, it was all the way back then, what does it matter? Well, your God is supposed to be the giver of what is right and wrong. And if he's giving a law code, you would think the laws would be right. And since this God is unchanging, as the scriptures claim, then you would then have to admit that this law is good, it's just, and it is unchanging. And I do think that there's a lot of scripture, like in Matthew 5:17 through 20, that have Jesus explaining that the law still stands. That the law stands until all is accomplished and until heaven and earth pass away. And that does not happen until the end of Revelation. Majority of Christians do believe we are still waiting for Christ's second coming. We are still waiting for certain prophecies to be fulfilled. And according to Revelations 21 at the very beginning, that is when the new heaven and earth will come. So according to the words of Jesus, while the law might not be required to give you that salvation, it is still something that his followers should keep and should teach others to keep. And that stands until the end of at least this world's time, at the end of Revelation. So that includes today. But we see lots of Christians also want to follow the word of Paul, a man, when he says that you're not under the law and you don't have to follow it, versus what Jesus said when he said, yes, you should follow it. Otherwise, you're going to be least in the kingdom of heaven. So Paul's way makes you least in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus told you how to be the highest in the kingdom of heaven. Again, you're all in the kingdom of heaven. This is not about a salvation issue. This is about your place in doing what God wanted, and so therefore your place in heaven. But let's move on with the conversation.
So at the time, it seemed pretty reasonable.
Right. Hey, Joy, can you drop down, call Dom, let Dom know Dr. Bowen's here to talk? Okay. Okay. Yeah, as soon as he gets busy, Dr. Bowen comes up. That's interesting.
Sorry, it's totally fine if we have to do this at a different time. I don't want
Let me get my
So how are you
glasses.
doing?
Yeah, I'm doing okay.
How are you doing? I think
It's
he wanted
hot.
to talk to you. It is, man. I
Oh,
live
it's
in the
better.
south, so it's definitely hot. It's
I gotcha.
it's 100 degrees out. It's over 100 degrees right now outside.
Yeah, I'm here in Maryland, and it
Oh, that's terrible.
yeah, it's just like right up 90. So
Yeah, I think he
We've been in
wanted to
the
talk to you some more about
the early
slavery
90s, and I'm not
and
looking
that,
forward to over 100.
and maybe cover some other stuff. But I think that's what he wanted to talk to you about. So, Mr. Barzell, how are you doing today?
Hello, I'm from Sweden.
Yes, sir.
Let me see if I can skip ahead to where Dom comes back. Okay, so basically a minute after I gave up and was like, I'm gonna try to see where Dom comes back, stuff changes. So we'll just get right back into it.
Don, here's Josh.
Yes. Josh is here, Doc.
Hey, Dr. Josh, good afternoon.
hey, how are you?
I'm well.
Awesome.
I'm a mute up.
So, look, how much time do you have?
10.
Real quick, because I'm certain it's going to be important. The guy with the deeper voice is Wonder. The guy with the not as deep voice as him is Dom. That's it. And then I think Dr. Joshua Bowen is going to be obvious given his position. It being a little different probably who he is. But those are the people that I think are going to be talking. There is someone else on the screen. I don't know if she's going to be joining, but if she does, we'll call her Joy.
10 minutes, 15 maybe.
Good.
If that works.
Yes, sir. Now, so, according to Exodus 21, the Hebrew word, I know you know these two words, avad, right? A-V-A-D, and eved. Can you explain the difference of those two Hebrew words, please?
Yeah, so one's a verb and one's a noun. So generally, avad, like, it means to do work. So it can.
Dr. Josh, you muted up.
Sorry, can you hear me? I just
Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, sorry. The timing of this stuff is hilarious. So yeah, a VOD can hilarious. So yeah, a VOD can have it's sort of a spectrum. It can be like, to go do regular work. It can be used in the context of slavery. It can kind of run the gambit. Eved as a noun in most of its contexts, and I mean it's used a lot, so I wouldn't want to say all of them because I haven't looked at all of them, but most of the context it has to do with a slave or servant meaning. So it's not. I guess the verbal form can take a broader range of meaning. So like a paid worker could be described as somebody voting, but an eved,
right?
yeah, but an eved is usually in the context, almost always in the context of like a slave.
Okay, so I looked this up, and this is why I wanted to talk to you. I looked up the word avad and eved, right? So they're only used out of 291 times, right? Avad is used. That's like 6% probability of eved being in context of a slave that's being mistreated throughout the whole Torah. So in Leviticus 25, how do we make the distinction that the eved are being forced and mistreated?
Well, I don't think that the Torah is making the argument that they're being mistreated by their lights.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that. Yeah, I don't think that anybody in the Hebrew Bible any of the writers in the Hebrew Bible, if we were to like go back and ask them, do you think that, is it okay to mistreat a slave, that they would say yes, right? But there it would, I think that would fall onto what they would define as mistreatment. I think that's probably going to be different from what we say today.
Okay, awesome. So in the modern sense, would you agree that all the assertions being made toward the Hebrew Bible I think people are being dishonest and uncharitable? Would you agree? Or what's your stance on that?
They definitely can be uncharitable.
In what way?
That's true. Like when people say things like Exodus 21, 20 to 21 is like a handbook on how to beat your slave within an inch of their life and get away with it. I think that's just to not understand what the law is doing.
Okay, so from your stance, what is that law, which we both know is a case law, what is that law stating for Israel to do? Exodus 21, 20 through 21.
Yeah, it's designed. These are people that have just like in the rest of the ancient Near East, they've just like in the rest of the ancient Near East, they've.
Let's read it real quick for context, shall we? I think so. Alright, they said Exodus 21, 20-21. When a man strikes his slave, male or female, with a rod, and the slave dies under his hand, he shall be avenged. But if the slave survives a day or two, he is not to be avenged, for the slave is his money. I see Exodus 21 as talking about indentured servants. So when this is a master that is striking their slave, their eved, this is clearly talking about someone who is in the service role. And so they are doing this indentured servitude, and so because they are struck, and later you can see in the chapter, like if they're disfigured, their contract's null and void, basically, they get to go free. But when a man strikes his slave with a rod, and the slave dies under his hand, he shall be avenged. And if the slave survives a day or two, he shall not be avenged. I do agree that this would, this could be taken and, said, well, this is a how-to manual. I wouldn't agree that it's a how-to manual. I don't think that that's the intention that it was written with. I think it was just kind of saying, hey, if this happens, this is how we view the situation, and so this is how we would move forward legally. Now, the thing where people think that it's like a how-to manual is because it says in verse 21, but if the slave survives a day or two, he is not to be avenged, for the slave is his money. Basically saying that, well, you could beat someone so bad that they end up dying the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day, and nothing would happen to the master, because then the master could technically claim that the slave did not die as a result of the beating. Now, here's the thing, though. I don't think that was, on everyone's mind when they had slaves back then. I don't think that they're like, oh, yes, I could kill all my slaves by just beating them bad and letting them get, like, infections or whatever the case. I don't know. I don't think that that's the intention they had in mind. I think that they were just saying that we could, very confidently say that the death was a result of the beating within this time period, and the rest we're not certain, so we're not certain about putting someone to death because of it, or giving them some kind of punishment. But that's I don't quite see what they're gonna go with this, but I just wanted to read it for the context and talk about it for a moment, so let's get back to it.
They're either a pledge, or they're a distrainee, or they're someone that is under the law assumed to ultimately at some point go back to their free status. Sorry, there's an echo now.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask a question, but go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Dr. Josh.
Sorry, I'll be quick. Right, sorry. So, the law assumes that they're ultimately going to go back to, ostensibly going to go back to their status of freedom, and so they, the law seeks to mitigate.
Yeah, see indentured servitude.
Of them. So, on the one hand, it's assumed just in the ancient Near East and Hebrew Bible, that slaves are going to be physically corrected, right? They're going to be physically corrected and corporal punishment, usually with like a wooden rod of some sort. But the law is there to try to mitigate that abuse because they're still considered to be, and ultimately, I don't know.
Alright, sorry about that. We're back. Oh, bud. Alright. Sorry if you can hear my dogs in the background. Alright, let's just jump right back into it.
So that's what it's, and you see laws like this, like in the laws of Hammurabi, 115, 116. You see sort of similar laws there. So yeah, it's definitely there to try to protect the debt slave. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that, because Pop, you ready?
Ready?
Okay, I'm gonna say this before I mute up. So, yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Josh, because what we deal with on here, we want to have honest discourse about the text. So if you're saying that was put in place for protection or against abuse, and we get people saying the total opposite, and they're not taking the whole Torah as a whole, in honesty, in my opinion, they're just saying, oh, it's a law to beat and do all these things. You can do what you want to do if they don't unalive in the 2 days and things of that nature, because you and I both know these laws are not, they were written in Hebrew, the original language. And when it translates to English or what have you, it doesn't read what, you know what I'm saying? They're not sister language, so it's not going to read how we want it to sound in the modern sense. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, that can definitely happen. And I think this is sort of, I feel like this is sort of, in part, my role in these spaces, to try to, I remember I did an interview with Seth, what's his name? Seth Andrews. And he said, like, what is one thing, we were talking about slavery, and he said, what is one thing that atheists and skeptics get wrong all the time? And this was my example, right? What the law could have allowed, and maybe historically did allow, through its, through, I don't want to say loopholes or something, but like through, through people utilizing it in the way that they're disregarding it or something. And the intent of the law, those are distinct things. And so I mean, we all of us on all sides of this thing miss these things, sometimes more often than not. But I think it's important to establish first what the intent of the law is like, and I'll shut up. But like Exodus 21, 7 through 11, that's another law. I mean, all of these laws are intended to protect the vulnerable party in the transaction. So like 7 through 11 is there to try to protect this Amah, this female slave, this daughter that's being sold into servitude.
Okay.
That's the point of the law, is to protect.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Josh. Go ahead, Pop.
Oh, of course.
So,
Alright, so before it switches, I don't see where the issue is, or at least not from my standpoint. I definitely agree that in their mind's perspective when writing the law, this all makes sense, that this is normal to them, and this is how they could go ahead and ensure protections for certain parties. And like I said, I truly think that when we're talking in Leviticus 21, Exodus 21, the context is showing that this is talking about indentured servitudes, and so it makes perfect sense why they would want to preserve the individual so that when they obtain freedom again, they'll be okay. All of that makes perfect sense to me, and it doesn't make any sense why. Well, I mean, and like I said, I definitely do agree that there are some atheists that like to really say oh, this loophole in the law was there so you could do it. I don't think that that's the case. I just think that with anything, that some people found a loophole in the law and maybe abused it. But the problem is, again, if this is a good and perfect God, why does his law have loopholes? Why does it have flaws? Why is it that it's something that doesn't transcend time and, is right then and right now? It's right then and wrong now. So something clearly has changed, and that's contradictory to this claimed nature of this perfect, unchanging God, which I think is another thing that you could take to your side of why the biblical God is not real. So, or at least the most common depiction of him. It is possible that a different version out there, the biblical God exists, maybe without the triomni properties, but specifically that one, being perfect, being unchanging, being all full of justice, it's just contradictory to what we see in the text. So, yeah, certain, I agree that if there are atheists out there that are twisting the scripture, that's definitely possible. It's also possible they don't understand it themselves, or they've only seen parts of it. I think one of the most common examples I can give is one talking about how when a man sells his daughter as a slave in Exodus 21:7, she does not go out as the male slaves do. And there's a passage in Deuteronomy, I kind of forget where at the moment, I'll put in the notes at the bottom, where Deuteronomy is basically like a clarification or a retelling of the law in Exodus. So it's clarifying what we see in Exodus, and it specifies that, yes, a Hebrew female, whether they're male or female, will go out free in that 7th year. However, the context is showing us in Exodus 21 that she is being sold for a very specific reason, to be a wife. She is going into a role that is a forever role, and that's different than someone who is going into a debt servitude and paying it off in 6 years. And that's why, and that would be the difference between these two passages, as well as how they also tie in together to clarify what we see in Exodus 21. So that's something that I see lots of atheists either not know about or either purposely ignore, so that they can just say the women don't get to go free ever in any case. And I don't agree with that. So I think that the scriptures do need to be looked at with their intention, as well as the understanding that these were people writing their human laws, and they were very well influenced by the cultures around them. That's why we see their law codes borrowing from other, law codes around them, the Hammurabi Code, for example. And when we see, at least in the scriptures, we see that they are trying to take care of their own people. But again, it's flawed. And so therefore, it is impossible for it to be the result of a perfect, just God giving his law to his people. It just doesn't make sense. But let's go ahead and jump to, I believe Wonder is going to talk to Dr. Bowen now. So let's figure out what's going on, and let's see if it is true that he can get him to admit that chattel slavery does not exist in the Bible. I think that would be very strange, because then that kind of puts away his entire life's work. Dr. Bowen is very much on the stance that it does, actually. So let's see what happens.
Got a quick question. You're bringing up Exodus 21, and who is Exodus 21 talking about? Is it talking about Hebrews, or is it talking about neighbors or Gentiles?
Yeah, this is debated, and I don't know that there's an easy answer to it from my vantage point. So, like 21:16 is sort of like a quintessential case in trying to analyze this. So I tend to think that 21:16 is just meant to be universal. I think it just means you're not supposed to kidnap anybody. There are good arguments to support people believing or concluding, and academically there are good arguments for scholars to say no, that like in its canonical form is intended to be strictly Israelites. When you look at like Deuteronomy 24:7, and you look at how the Septuagint translate Exodus 21:16, but those are different questions. Like, what was the original intent of that casuistic law? it's complicated. So, sorry, this is probably not a very useful answer. But I think when we're looking at the slave laws, we kind of have to, the way that we can best get at this, I think, is to look at what the text is describing about those particular slaves, and then looking at the wider ancient Near Eastern law collections and seeing if we have other sort of comparable cases. And I think that can aid us in trying to ascertain, all right, who is this talking about? So, for an example, I'm sorry, I'm just blathering now, but like we have in 28 to 32, we have the case of the goring ox, and that's a law that we see elsewhere in A&E law collections. And the treatment, like how the law seems to adjudicate that, seems to be more under property law, which is in, pretty good agreement with what we see in the other ancient Near Eastern law collections. And it seems to be different from what we see in 20 to 21, 26 to 27, which seems to parallel more like debt slave or pledge or distrainee. It falls closer to family law than it does to property law. And so I think it's trying to get at, like, I guess what I'm saying is I don't know. I don't know that the text has that in mind specifically, like this is for foreigners or this is for Israelites, as much as something like Deuteronomy 15 or Leviticus 25. And that may be one of the reasons, and I'll shut up after this, it may be one of the reasons that those two passages seem to go to great lengths to identify the parties involved, maybe.
The reason why I ask, can Israelites own other Israelites as slaves?
They can take them as debt slaves for 6 years in Exodus 21 and in Deuteronomy 15. Now they can be born into slavery. So in that case, they can, like in 2 to 6, they can be born into slavery. And Hebrew man can volunteer. A Hebrew debt slave can volunteer for permanent slavery. It seems like women, at least whoever the woman is in 21, 4, and 5, that woman seems to be to fall under the category of a chattel slave as well. So like a permanent slave.
Okay.
Again, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Do you agree with Michael Brown, Copan, Flanagan, Turek, that there is no Hebrew word for slave, and Eved and Avad never meant to be slave, and it was added into the English Bible well after that, and it shouldn't be in there?
No, I would. Yeah, I wouldn't word it that way. I guess what I would say, Peter Williams has like a lengthy, I think it's a paper on this, and he's sort of giving like just standard lexicographic methodology. So, sorry, that's not the right way to go. What I would say is we each have to, when we come into a discussion like this, see what we're bringing with that term slave, right? In the same way that... Oh, go ahead.
You're talking about, you keep saying chattel slavery, but the definition of chattel slavery that people use is not even the definition of chattel slavery, even with the American slave trade, because chattel slavery has tenets to it or components to it. It's just not owning a person as property. It's literally components or tenets to it. Would you agree about that? If I name the tenets?
This is what I mean. So, like, that's why I'm really careful, like, in my book and in these discussions, when we talk about, like, a chattel slave, from an academic standpoint, from an ancient Near Eastern standpoint, when we talk about chattel slavery, we're just talking about people who are owned as movable property, right? Now,
that's not even the definition of property in the Bible. So they're not movable property. So if you're saying movable property, aren't you still talking about modern day the term chattel slavery didn't come out until the late 1500s.
I don't know how they wouldn't be movable property. They're seen as legal objects. They're possessions to be owned, and wherever they go, they can take their slaves with them. Is that not movable property? They can, they can take, or they can buy them from other people. Is that not movable property? Like, it just, I don't know. And then in certain passages, they can just decide, hey, that city, let's make war with it, and then either have them surrender and have them be our slaves, our forced labor, or we'll kill all the men and we'll just take the rest as plunder anyway. That's seen as possessions. Those are seen as objects to be owned. That's slavery. That's immovable property. I don't know. I feel like it's pretty clear.
Would you agree with that?
I don't know the etymology of the English word.
Okay.
I guess what. Okay.
No, go ahead. I'm interrupting you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good because you were going somewhere. Go ahead.
So, okay, let me give you the tenets and tell me if you agree with the tenets of chattel slavery. In order to be a chattel, the term chattel slavery, a slave must be oppressed. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would.
Slavery is oppression.
Not trying to be pedantic. I think we would have to define what we mean by
It's
oppressed.
the same thing.
Because I think.
Meaning.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Meaning holding somebody against their will, not allowing them to be free, forcing them into labor, would be chattel slave, would be oppression. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Examples.
Definitely.
Okay, cool. A chattel slave would be kidnapped. According to the definition or the tenet, chattel slavery has kidnapping. Would you agree with that?
No. And again, so
Sometimes.
I would probably agree.
Not always.
When someone today hears that term, that's how it's used. So if that's like if you're looking up Oxford dictionary or something usage, and the things that it lists there as the constellation of characteristics that fall under that term, yes, that's probably the case, right?
Okay.
Sorry.
So basically, if Wonder wants to stick with a modern definition of chattel slavery, then it would have to include kidnapping. But we're trying to stay true to what they meant back then and what they were talking about. And so it seems, at least according to the text, I think it fully supports that, yes, you could obtain them by kidnapping under certain circumstances, such as war. They would not see that as kidnapping, but you couldn't just go kidnap a free person. And then also you could obtain slaves by buying them as well, and you would not see that in any way as kidnapping. But back then they would still be under this form of chattel slavery. They would be bought. They would be forced to work and do things like that in the ancient Near East area. So in that culture, in that time period when they're talking about slavery, no, it is not simply always involving kidnapping. Sometimes yes, but we would consider that kidnapping, whereas more so in that time period they would not, because they would think that they had every right by their God to go and off their neighbors and then take their children as slaves. But yeah, so Wonder, it seems, is using a very modern definition of chattel slavery, but we'll go on.
With chattel slavery would have forced labor without pay, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Chattel slavery would have stripping
Very
of
little to
rights of who a person is how they and taking away their autonomy as a person, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Not usually not all rights,
Okay.
but many, most. Yeah.
Okay.
Most, not all
And
typically, but
chattel
most.
slavery would be movable property as I own you, like a dog or cattle or something like that, correct?
Yeah, in that they would be alienable, able to be sold,
Okay.
that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So how
So what we said
are
earlier.
doing any of that if we're agreeing to terms on chattel slavery? Where are the Israelites doing any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's being described pretty clearly in Leviticus 25, 44 to 46.
Show me the forced labor without pay.
Ooh. Let's skip there real quick. For context, let's read Leviticus 25, 44 through 46, but I'm very curious about this. Because I got an answer. I'm very curious as to what Dr. Bowen says. So Leviticus 25, 44 through 46 reads, "As for your male and female slaves, whom you may have, you may buy male and female slaves from among the nations that are around you. You may also buy from among the strangers who sojourn with you and their clans that are with you, who have been born into your land, that they may be your property. You may bequeath them to your sons after you to inherit as possessions forever, and you may make slaves of them. But over your brothers, the people of Israel, you shall not rule over one another ruthlessly." And so let's move forward to the question was asked, the forced labor without pay, as being one of the tenets to chattel slavery. Where is that? So let's see what Dr. Bowen says.
Show me the oppression. Show me the movable property or treating as a dog or a cat. Because God literally says you can't oppress anyone at all.
Right. So this is where I think we have to be careful about, again, setting our definitions. When
Okay.
well, that's why I'm trying to be careful about how I.
I'm so sorry, one more thing. So oppression is slavery. You can't have slavery without oppression. If you enslave someone, you are oppressing them because you are limiting their rights. You are taking away their autonomy and their identity. We see that when the Israelite soldiers are able to take women that they think are attractive from the prisoners of war, and they, even according to Bible Hub, will take their identity of their old self and give them the quote-unquote new identity of now the wife of an Israelite. It is a marriage where it is based on the man's attraction for her. There is no worry about her consent or anything of the sort. So we do see someone's identity being taken and someone's identity being controlled and someone's identity being told that this is how it's going to be now. And I know that I've had this conversation with Wonder before, that, he thinks that this is all consensual on the woman's part because it says she will cut her hair, she will cut her nails, and I just can't get, past where is the consent. Where's the consent? Because even if a victim does something like cut her hair, that doesn't mean that she's consenting to being his wife. That doesn't mean that she's consenting to going home with a man that just came in with his army and turned her whole world upside down and is responsible for, most likely, the death of her parents, her family, her loved ones, and everyone around her, or the enslavement of them thereof. And then we also see forced labor in Deuteronomy 20, where we see that they could just pick a city and say, hey, be our slaves, or we're going to kill all the men and make the rest of you our slaves anyway. But very specifically, when we get to, before we get there. So the oppression is there. The taking people's identity is there. The controlling people of their rights is there. And at the very end of Leviticus 25, 46 to, or 44 through 46, so at the end of 46, we see that there are protections against being ruthless to your fellow Israelite. But where is that for the non-Hebrew slaves that he just said you could have? I don't see where that is. And remember, you could beat your indentured servant with a rod. So if you could do that to someone that does have legal protections, what about someone who it doesn't seem has any, at least for the mistreatment. Again, it's not saying that the intention was there to go around and beat all your slaves and, make their lives living hell. But you could, and that is problematic for a God that is supposed to be good, just, and this is supposed to be his perfect law that is matching his nature, which is supposedly unchanging. So I think it's very clear where the oppression is and where the stripped identity is and all of this other stuff that, goes with his traits of chattel slavery. I think it's all very clearly there. But let's see what we get to as far as the payment goes.
Yeah,
Like how we're talking about.
I get you.
So like, if we're saying that someone who is, able to be passed on as inheritance, let's say, or someone that is described as part of the landed property, that if they are sold, they would be returned to the original owner who had to sell them, which is how, in 44 to 46, the Eveds and Amaz are described. That if we're saying that those people who are able to be alienated, passed on as inheritance, made to serve forever, if that is oppression, which sounded like what we were talking about oppression was, then I think that falls under that definition. However, but if we go to like the Hebrew word, I think it's yana, to oppress, which is used in like Deuteronomy 23, 16 to 17, where a foreign slave runs away into Israel, they're not to be oppressed, right? Or earlier in Leviticus, you see this as well.
You see it in Exodus, where God literally says in Exodus, if you oppress the stranger or anyone,
right,
he will, and if you oppress anyone, and you cannot treat them like you were treated in Egypt, which was literally what you're describing in Leviticus, and then he goes on to say, you cannot mistreat or the widow or the orphan, and if they cry out to me and I hear their cry, I'm going to unalive you with the sword, and I'm going to leave your wife a widow and your children fatherless. God is not playing with oppression. If you go to Deuteronomy 5, he literally says in Deuteronomy 5, you cannot treat anyone as you were treated as slaves in Egypt. Well, if we compare how the Israelites were treated in Egypt, that's literally what you're describing in Leviticus 25, which means now we have a problem. Because if God says you can't treat them like you were treated in Egypt, and you're saying Leviticus 25 says you can treat them like you were treated in Egypt, where either God's lying or everybody else is.
Yeah, no, I understand the confusion here. And again, I think much of this is predicated on the way that we're translating terms like oppression, right? So when we talk about slavery and we talk about the characteristics that we see in the Hebrew Bible, and then we look at those in the wider ancient Near East, this is how people that write on the topic, this is how they set those definitions. So like if you look in I think it's in chapter 1 where I try to set a definition of slavery. It's meant to encompass all of these characteristics that we see. So the oppression, part of the problem with the oppression of what we saw in Egypt was that you had people that were free that were reduced to slavery unjustly or illegally, right? That's part of the issue.
By who?
By the Egyptians.
By the Egyptians. Yes. Definitely. Yeah, I will agree with that. Okay.
Yeah. So,
but hold up. May I ask this question? And I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good.
So, Are you saying the same thing the Egyptians did, the Israelites did?
No.
Or no? Okay.
No.
All right.
I
Yeah.
don't think that's what he
So
said.
this is if you look at Leviticus 25, there's a very strong contrast in the chapter. And the contrast, it's a complicated, from like a redaction history standpoint, it's very, very complicated, that chapter. But what it ends up being in its canonical form is there's a sharp contrast between what we see in 39 to 43 and 47 to 55 and what we see in 44 to 46. Like those two things are those the one that, I don't know, 39 to 43, 47 to 55 and 44 to 46 are contrasted pretty sharply.
Right.
Yes.
And so one of the big takeaways from that contrast is that Israelites are Yahweh's slaves. Like, he's emphatic about it. You cannot make another Israelite serve as a slave because they are my slaves, whom I brought up out of Egypt. So they cannot be sold in a slave sale, right? You can't make them do the work of a slave.
Right, but here you go. When God says that, and that's why the people are named teach us not slavery, because we're not God's slaves, we're God's servants. God does not mean we're held under slave rules. When he says that, I mean, that's biblical.
So my Bible in the ESV has a footnote where it says in verse 42, "For they are my servants whom I brought out of the land of Egypt." The footnote at the bottom does say Hebrew slaves, matching that to servants. So take of that what you will.
Teaching across the board. So that's why the authors and the scholars I named, and you agree. I mean, I watched your debate with Michael Brown. Great debate. But I watched your debate with Michael Brown, and you kind of went to the side where you said you have extremists on both ends that don't know what they're talking about. And when you compare it to the Far East, what the Israelites were doing was not slavery in the sense that everybody else was doing, but you use the word slave so freely, where it's servant and not slave. And I'm not understanding why we just can't say it's servitude because of how they were treated, and it's not slavery.
Well, I mean, I think it's because, well, a couple of things. Three things that come to mind. So Michael Brown and I are pretty good friends.
Y'all kept saying that y'all didn't even want to do the debate. Even though it really wasn't a debate. But it was great for people to see. It was not a debate, man. It was people to see. It was not a debate, man.
It was funny.
Y'all were like singing Kumbaya and everything else. It was not a debate.
It was really funny, just as an aside, when he came in backstage, and I'm looking at the clock.
My God, we have like a couple minutes left in this audio recording. I really hope that they answer that payment question and we hear him say that chattel slavery isn't in the Bible. I'm still waiting.
So I just got a couple minutes, sorry, but it just as it is, it's funny because he came in and I hadn't met him before, and I said, "Oh, Dr. Brown, it's really nice to meet you," and he said, "Oh, yeah, Dr. Brown, really nice to meet you too. What are we talking about tonight?" It really just set the stage for what the rest of the night was like. I think
that's fun.
I've debated Paul Copan both in person and in writing. Like I disagree with a lot of what.
I want to see that debate.
Yeah, it's on. I mean, debate's probably too strong. It's probably similar to what I did with Michael Brown.
Michael Brown. Okay.
Yeah. But we've had more like writing back and forth on.
Okay.
I can't remember the name of the website. Anyway,
we'll have to find it.
But like Paul and I disagree on things about slavery, things about violence and divine commands of violence, and what do we say, Shmenicide or whatever it is that we say. But a lot of you're absolutely right. I think it's very important for us to not import, to be careful not to import all of the things that are attached to terms today. The example that I always give is like the word cake, right? If you read Elijah asking to have some cakes made, like you don't want to read like icing and frosting or whatever.
It's flatbread.
Right, that's right. That Hebrew word ugad, it doesn't mean like bird. Even though today, if you go to like Israel and you say ugah, like it's gonna be a birthday cake, but that doesn't mean that we can just like read that back into that. So in the same way, that's a really obvious example. But in the same way, like we can't just read all of those characteristics back. So you're absolutely right. It was illegal everywhere. At least everywhere that we know about it.
So I gotta ask this question. Why are you not? And if I'm not being disrespectful, I promise you, great conversation. But I gotta ask this.
All right. Well, that is all the audio that I have. All right. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure exactly what happened there at the end. We didn't get the conclusion. I'm not quite sure exactly, like, where it was going. I want to know what that question was going to be. Because he's like, I just got to ask. But also, when he says you're completely right, like, it seems like, yeah, you can't, it didn't seem like he finished his sentence. It seemed like he got cut off, and I don't think that was at all intentional. So, but it seems that from my understanding of how the conversation was going, it's, yeah, of course, you can't just take one term and go all the way back and be like, oh, you whatever my modern thoughts are on it today, like the cakes, I can't just put it back in, to what the Bible's saying and stuff like that, which makes perfect sense. So that's why we need to, as Dr. Joshua Bone was saying, be very specific with our terms, what we're looking at. So what exactly, like, because again, I don't have the ending, so I'm not quite sure if there was any clarification or anything. Seems like Dr. Joshua Bowen completely recognizes all of those traits in the biblical text, and then is very specific when he talks about in that time period what they thought of certain situations, like when it came to the kidnapping and stuff like that. Like, in our modern day, because it's outlawed everywhere pretty much, that we do think of slavery involving kidnapping and stuff like that, but back then it could also just be purchasing or being born into that role, and it's a forever role where you are not equal to the free people that are around you, and you have limited rights, not as much to the people around you, and you are movable property. You could be bought, you could be sold, you could be moved around. All these things line up with our understanding of what chattel slavery is today, as well as what their understanding of chattel slavery was back then. So I don't quite see where the concession was that, the Bible doesn't say that, chattel slavery is acceptable or in the law of God. I didn't hear anything of Dr. Joshua Bowen saying that. Maybe he said that after this audio finished, but we don't have that, so this is the best we got. But let's take a look at that payment thing. So in the same chapter of Leviticus 25, and it was referenced, but but a different part of the scripture was referenced. So it says in verse 39 that if your brother becomes poor beside you and sells himself to you, you shall not make him serve as a slave. He shall be with you as a hired worker and as a sojourner, and he shall serve you until the year of Jubilee. And then he shall go out from you, and he and his children with him, and go back to his own clan, and return to the possessions of his fathers. For they are my servants, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt, and they shall not be sold as slaves. You shall not rule over him ruthlessly, but shall fear your God. So we see that there are two types of people that the Israelites can have technically doing their work. One are hired workers and another is slaves. And if it is your fellow Hebrew that falls on hard times and sells himself to you, they cannot be serving as a slave. They have to be as a hired worker who then gets to go free on the year of Jubilee, because they cannot be a slave because they belong to God, as Dr. Joshua Bowen was saying. But go to the very next verse in 44. As for your male and female slaves, whom you may have. So again, two types of people doing their work. One, hired workers, and another, slaves. So one, hired, payment, and the other, slave, no payment. There is a huge difference between the two, correct? Wonder's right on that. And both are allowed by God in his law. So again, as for your female and male slaves, whom you may have, you may buy male and female slaves from among the nations that are around you. And you also may buy from among the strangers that sojourn with you and their clans, and who have been born into your land, that they may be your property, and you may bequeath them to your sons after you to inherit as possessions forever. Again, another example of movable property. They legally become the owners or the property of one person and then transfer to the ownership of another. And that's through inheritance versus buying or versus conquest. And then you may make slaves of them, but over your brothers, the people of Israel, you shall not rule over one another ruthlessly. I think that just hits the nail right on the head right there, that yes, they were allowed to have both hired workers and chattel slaves, and the Bible, at least in its legal code, is very clear on who can be who. But that's all I have for this right now, and we'll have our final thoughts here in a moment. So yeah, just my final thoughts are, it's a shame we didn't have the ending, but it does seem like Dr. Joshua Bowen was about to get off, so it was probably going to end pretty soon anyway. Maybe we'll be able to find out what that question was and what the answer was, and if they ever did talk about the payment and what the response to that was. But other than that, I want to thank Dom for providing the recording and being able to help us understand as much as possible what exactly happened. It doesn't seem like, from what we heard, Wonder's claims were verified, that Dr. Joshua Bowen said that child slavery is not allowed in the biblical text. It seems like Dr. Bowen was trying to be very clear about his terminology and being very specific when it came to examples, and we didn't quite get to the full conclusion there at the end, but nonetheless, it was a great conversation and I enjoyed listening to it. I missed it when it happened live, so it was great that I got to hear it now, and I hope that you all enjoyed it as well. And if you have any questions, please drop them down below, and I would love to engage with you guys. In the meantime, have a wonderful rest of your day, and take care.